Hello everyone, welcome back. Tom with Capo Fetish. Today I'm going to talk about 5 once great artists that have sold out in spectacular fashion. All right, these artists took selling out to a whole new level. So I'm going to start off here with number 1, and that is Chicago. Chicago Transit Authority, as they were known on their debut album from 1969. They were an incredible hard-edge jazz rock band. Of course, you know some of the hits. Does anybody really know what time it is? You have a song called Beginnings on here. You have the amazing guitar playing of Terry Kath, who was actually revered by Hendrix. You've got an incredible bass player and vocalist, Peter Cetera, Robert Lamb on vocals and piano. Great rhythm section, great horn section that's still with them today. Just an incredible debut. Nothing really sounded like them at the time. And this could kind of continued this pattern throughout the early 70s with Chicago 2. You have 25 or 624 with just a blistering solo from Terry Kath, really hard-edged. Even the brass sounds hard on this song. And you've got really nice ballads like Color My World with a really soulful voice of Terry Kath, the late Terry Kath. And so eventually as the 70s progressed, it became more, the albums became less, shall we say, consistent, but they were still putting out really good hits. If you get their greatest hits album, this one has just a lot of great hits from the mid-70s as well as the early 70s, like you have Call Me, Wishing You Were Here, Feeling Stronger Every Day, Saturday in the Park. But as the 70s progressed, by 76 you had a song called If You Leave Me Now, written by Peter Cetera. Very just kind of sappy love ballad. Became a huge hit all over the world, sold millions. And I think the record company at that point saw a new selling point for Chicago, and I think pretty much geared them towards just syrupy ballads. And by the 80s, they were just cranking out just syrup after syrup, with Hard to Say I'm Sorry, Look Away, Hard Habit to Break, You're the Inspiration, just these really sappy Peter Cetera songs. And they kept that going, and they never returned to their roots that were on that first couple of albums that they produced. And yeah, I mean, they sold out. They sold out. There's no doubt about it. And they're still playing today. They're still playing the syrupy songs. And they sound odd with some of those earlier songs. They just never reclaimed that magic that they had in the early days with Terry Kath. Once he passed in the late 70s, it just seemed like a completely different band. So the Chicago of yesteryear, late 60s, early 70s, is completely different from the Chicago from the 80s onward. And I could say, without question, they sold out big time. Number 2, Rod Stewart. Incredible artist. Look at these albums he was on. Jeff Beck, Truth. Incredible. Beckola. Maybe not as solid, but some great vocals on here by Rod. And then, of course, while he was with Rod Stewart, after he left the Jeff Beck group, he went on to the Faces. Steve Marriott left the Small Faces, so they brought in, the remaining 3 Small Faces brought in Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart, cranked out 4 great albums. Ooh La La, Not As Good as a Wink as to a Blind Horse, Long Player, and Small Faces, which is actually just the Faces. This is their first album. I kind of went backwards there on the discography. But yeah, Rod was on a roll. And then during his tenure with the Faces, he had a solo career going on too. And the best albums during that period are Gasoline Alley, just an absolute incredible album from 1970. Of course, Every Picture Tells a Story. It has Mandolin Wind and Maggie May. And then Never a Dull Moment from 72 with You Wear It Well and a lot of other great material. And by the time his label Mercury, he was done with his label Mercury, he signed with Warner Brothers, and they just turned him into this kind of, you know, whereas before his music was more kind of earthy and you could relate to it, the common guy, common gal could relate to that music. He turned him into a superstar, and the music became secondary. You know, it was all about Rod's looks and his moves and everything. And the music suffered for it. You know, he went disco with Do You Really Think I'm Sexy, Young Turks, and Infatuation. Some guys have all the luck. Just really just mainstream crap. So I think a lot of people forget how amazing Rod Stewart was before he became just monster huge. I mean, he became huge with Maggie May, but he continued that type of style for a few more years. But once he signed to Warner Brothers, it just became more about the personality and the performance rather than the music. And I think Rod's reputation suffered for it. But if you could ever get a hold of any of those early Rod Stewart albums or Jeff Beck or Faces, those are just incredible albums and shows the real pure raw talent of Rod Stewart before he became huge and writing mediocre stuff. So Rod Stewart for me comes in at number 2. Number 3 is Aerosmith. I mean, Aerosmith, when they came out, they had such a great sludgy sound, really raw, unapologetic, very, albums like Rocks were just amazing albums, just great old rock and roll, dirty, sludgy. Toys in the Attic, same thing, great songs, Sweet Emotion, Walk This Way, Get Your Wings, which came out before that with Train Kept A-Rollin'. But then once they reached a low point, I don't know what happened. I think what happened was that when the video for Run DMC came out with Walk This Way, it became an unexpected hit, and they were no longer on the Columbia Records at that point. And then Geffen signed them and turned them into this very schmaltzy band. Gone were the kind of the raw power, the raw energy of Aerosmith, and in came these really just subpar songs like Dude Looks Like a Lady, Angel, Crying. They completely sold out. The early Aerosmith, it sounds nothing like the later Aerosmith, and they never really regained that raw energy that they initially had. They kind of just pandered to the MTV audience, and that was it. They sold a lot of records, but the music was not as interesting. So I'm putting Aerosmith at number 3 for me. Number 4, Genesis. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. These 4 albums are 4 of the greatest prog rock albums of all time. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway with Peter Gabriel. These all have Peter Gabriel on them. Selling England by the Pound, coming out in 73. Genesis Foxtrot from 72. With songs like Supper's Ready and The Musical Box and the entirety of Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I mean, just amazing musicianship. Peter Gabriel, like his vocals, his theatrics, and just the instrumentation by Tony Banks on keyboards, Phil Collins on drums, Mike Rutherford on bass, and they were just an amazing band writing like really complex songs though that were very accessible over repeated listenings. This is nursery rhyme. So by the time Peter Gabriel left and Collins took over, they kind of continued in this vein with albums like Trick of the Tail, but as they went on, they became more and more poppy. And by the time the MTV generation started, they became a completely different band with schmaltz like, Mama, That's All, Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, Tonight, 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 I Can't Dance. The Genesis of the early years sounds nothing like the Genesis of the Phil Collins period, at least the later Phil Collins period. They completely sold out, in my opinion. I mean, these guys were classically trained musicians who put together these amazing long compositions on these early albums. And, just amazing writing skills. And then to think that they actually just kind of like put their talent aside and just went complete pop and schmaltz is unbelievable. So I don't know. For me, they lost me after Trick of the Tail. But when you think about their earlier stuff like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Selling England by the Pound, and then you hear stuff like I Can't Dance from the 80s. It's just like it's incredible. It's just an incredible sellout in my opinion. So Genesis for me is number 4. Number 5, my last one, number 5 is U2. Could any band sell out more than U2? By the 3rd album, I liked the first 3 albums, Boy, October, and War, but by Unforgettable Fire, there was something up. They were starting to pander towards the American audience, writing songs about Martin Luther King, talking about Joshua Tree, and all these Americana type things. It's like that they didn't really know anything about, you know? I mean, it was just, they had a completely original sound. It didn't sound like anybody when they came out. Completely unique guitar sound, vibe. They had their Irish roots intact. I mean, by Unforgettable Fire, Joshua Tree, Rattle and Hum, they became this global phenomenon, but it was based on a completely different persona than that they disbanded. You know, they were now this American band, you know, something that they always in the early days always promoted themselves as this Irish band with these Irish roots, and they're original, and they would never, you know, they would never pander to anything other than, you know, anyway. So by the time they ran out of that material with that Americana type thing, then they switched gears and put out Octoon Baby, which I thought was pretty good, and Zooropa. But then after that kind of wore off, then they kind of went back to their pompous, you know, preaching type stuff with All That You Can't Leave Behind. And then they did that whole thing on iTunes where they put their Songs of Innocence on 500 million iPhones. And now they're playing the Sphere in Vegas. So to me, they are the ultimate sellouts. U2, they come in at number one for me. The biggest sellouts of all time. And anyway, that's enough for my ranting. Thanks for watching. Take care.